Hello my dears, welcome back to another video. So in today's video, I had a chat with Ada Akpala. She is a writer, commentator, and is the head of content management for the Akuyana project. So last time me and Ada spoke, she shared some really interesting thoughts on the Black community, and that's something that I've always found really interesting, like the very concept of a Black community. And so I thought I'd bring it on my channel so we could discuss it a bit more and so I could pick her brain on the subject. And so that's basically what this video is today. It's just us discussing that and discussing the origins of all of these concepts and stuff and where she thinks a lot of these ideas come from. And so yeah, I really hope you enjoy. Thank you, Ada, for joining me today, and I'm really excited to discuss the Black community with you. So I have a question to ask you about a tweet that you posted, and you said, and I quote, "I owe no allegiance to the Black community, and the Black community owes me no allegiance. That's why I find it odd when people refer to my thoughts or ideas as a betrayal. No one should have to sacrifice their identity for the sake of group conscience. We are free." Do you recall saying that?
I do recall. I don't remember exactly when. I'm sure you have the date there. And I don't know the exact context behind that tweet and what prompted me, whether it was kind of, a random, one of my usual rants, or like sometimes something, or maybe a conversation or an incident. But yeah, I remember it.
Lovely. Brilliant. So because my next question is, do you believe in the Black community? Like, do you believe the Black community exists and you're just not included in it, or you don't feel a part of it? Or do you reject the concept of a Black community altogether?
Okay, so two different questions. So yes, I think it exists. I think it's something that's, present in our society now. I do reject the concept, yes, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It's something that we have created to make sense of things, to sort of group ourselves and so on. And that's the same category I'll put something like the Black community. Sometimes people think when they say the Black community, they think it's this kind of obvious or natural thing, is what I'm trying to say, and I'm is what I think people believe, but I'm trying to say that it's actually not. I think it's something that was created on the supposed belief of something shared, which obviously is the skin color, right? If you have the same or similar skin color, then you're part of the community. If you have African heritage and so on, if you're dark skinned, whatever, then yes, you are part of this community. But as we see, and as I have experienced, that's either not enough, or actually that's not what it means. Because if you do find that you say something that runs contrary to what is supposedly fitting for someone with your identity, then you are either cast out of the group, of the Black community, or you are told that you're sort of given that thing of, well, how can you say that as a member of the Black community? So yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So you argue, am I correct in saying that you do agree or accept the existence of a Black community, but you just don't feel as though it's as inclusive, and you don't feel personally part of said community? Would that be fair to say?
I mean, yeah, exactly. And even if I want to be part, I've been told so many times, and not even just with, things I say maybe online or opinions I've shared, even I'm just talking even growing up, because things I share online, if I'm sharing it, it's because I have had a personal or a real experience, or, I've had friends who've gone through the same things. And it would be things like, perhaps, you just like, maybe your friends sort of hear you listening to a certain song, or they hear you talk about a certain artist, and it's like, well, you do realize you're Black, right? So those kind of comments and, statements. So and it's not one time, it's not twice, it's many occasions in different scenarios where I've had that kind of thing said to me. So naturally, I question few things. First, because obviously the premises of the Black community is based on being Black, right? So that's the first question. Well, what does it mean to be Black, right? And why is my skin color, right, or where I'm from in the world not enough? Why do I have to be reminded, that I'm Black because of a certain genre of music I listen to, or a certain interest I have, or an idea that I have or don't have, why does that determine, So that's why I'm saying, yes, it's concocted for, obviously, and it was concocted, especially historically, for very specific reasons, but it's not as natural as other communities based on identity, such as an African community or Nigerian community or whatever, things that are based, I think, and it's the only one of its kind. We don't have a white community, or a brown community. I'm talking racially. We don't have any other racialized or community based on race than the Black community. So
my next question to you is, who would you say has criticized you the most for your ideas and your thoughts? Has it been more centered online, or is this something that's actually transcended into your personal life with friends and family?
So it started offline. That's really sort of one of the main motivations of why I came online in the first place. So as I said, throughout my sort of childhood and my life and stuff like that, I would hear these kind of comments, right? But I think the last straw for me was not during the 2020 riots, like most people, and like I've said before, but it actually started before then. When I gave an opinion about Meghan Markle, right? And it was a whole thing of, how can you criticize literally a Black person? You don't know what it's like, and all these kind of things. And the problem for me was not the criticism. I don't care about that. But it was the fact that I couldn't. No one challenged my criticism,
They just challenged the fact that you were making it.
Yes, at another so-called Black woman.
Yeah.
And I didn't mention race when I just mentioned the action. So why not push back on what I'm actually saying, rather than actually criticize or critique the content, what I'm saying, and not just this, okay, well, you're not allowed because a Black woman shouldn't pull down another Black woman kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's quite a common thing when it comes to criticism, is because I've had the same experience. It's not so much people criticizing, like I do get people criticizing things I say as well, which is fine. I have no issue with that. But it's more so the idea of, I've seen some Black people criticize me saying what I say because of the fact that I'm Black. How can you talk like this when you are a Black woman yourself, and regardless of what you say or do, they'll always just view you as any other N-word or any other Black person. It's just like, it's all centered around the idea that what's most important about me is my racial identity, not what I think. So it's a problem of, how can you as a Black person say those things? How can you as a Black woman, as a Black man, as whatever, how can you say those things? Because there's this kind of idea that you're supposed to be loyal and believe in things that you don't believe in or don't agree with, on the basis of the fact that you have to adhere to some kind of artificial unity. Because Meghan Markle is a mixed race woman, I have to agree with everything she does and says, even if I disagree with it. And so I know what you mean when you say, like, you get frustrated that people can't just disagree with what you're saying, but they have to disagree with the fact that you said it.
And it's even further than that. It's not the fact that I'm Black, but also who's agreeing with you, right?
Yes.
So I've literally, and I don't know if I still have the screenshots, because I was just so amazed that people have this kind of worldview. And it's not one time. Again, I would, especially in the beginning of when I started sort of creating content, and I would have Black people sort of, it's almost like they scroll through the comments first, or not even the comments, which is fine, I guess, but they had to almost go through the likes, because they would comment saying, well, look how many white people like it compared to look how many Black people. So you literally had to scroll through who's liked my content to see the ratio, then to decide whether they should agree with me, or they can agree with me, or they shouldn't. But I'm not like that. Just like any other rational human being, I don't base, my ideas on who is agreeing with me or not, right? I base my ideas on whether it's a right idea or it's a wrong idea. right? If I've had an experience that's led me to that conclusion, then that's the idea that I'm going to stick with. If someone else has another experience, or you have something different, a different way to talk about my experience, I can listen to that. But my ideas are formed that way, basically. Not I have a genuine belief or an idea, and I say, well, he's Asian and he agrees with me, or he's white and he agrees with me, so it must be wrong. I just think that's just such a juvenile way to go through the world.
It's oversimplistic, and people do this with politics as well. Like, oh, if you're saying something that people on the right agree with, or something that people on the left agree with, or whatever, then there's a bad opinion. You can't have an opinion that aligns with that political side. And it's just like, most people don't function like that. Most people don't think that way. You just look at things and think, do I agree with this or do I not? Do I think this is right or is this wrong? And you just voice it. My next question is, do you think the idea of a Black community serves any benefits? Are there any benefits that you can think of having this concept of a Black community?
There's benefits to some people, right? It just depends who you are. There's benefits to some, but that same benefit can be a nightmare to another. And that's really the truth. So for some people, it brings that sense of, belonging, especially people who are in a country that the majority doesn't look like them, for example, right? So of course the minority group will try to seek out people that look like them or are like them, whatever, even if it's on a surface level, just to have that sense of of security, on some level. And that's not even a problem. I don't think there's a problem to seek out people who you feel you can have something in common with. Of course not. Human beings, we do that all the time. If it's not with culture, we look for people with shared interests. We join those kind of communities and things like that. But I think the problem with just having a community based on race, okay? Culture makes sense, okay? You're in a foreign country per se, so you look for people who, if I go and live in China tomorrow, I'm gonna search out other Nigerians. I want to make jokes that maybe only Nigerians will understand. I want to look for where I can buy, pounded yam and plantain. Okay, yes, I said plantain, not plantain. But anyway, that's so normal. But I think the thing with a community based on Blackness, so I will talk about the benefit, I guess, but is that what do you share apart from your skin color? Yeah, what else is there that you share? Now, for some people, they will say, yes, the sharing of the skin color it actually means something else, of understanding the societies that we live in, right? Because that's a tenet of what the Black identity means, right? Consciousness. That's where the word woke even came from, right? Being conscious, being aware of the societies we live in. This is part of the Black identity. Making changes or fighting to make changes to change that effectively. So you see that a lot of what the Black community is, and this is the part where you get excluded because you don't have the right thoughts, is that idea of resistance, is that idea of, organizing and, fighting, for change and all these kind of things. So in that sense, then yes, of course, if that's your how you approach life in terms of seeking ways to deconstruct and construct new things, and if your level, the way you approach life is on that structural change level, then yes, you need the Black community. You find comfort in the Black community, people that you can completely relate with who have those same ideas to you. But apart from that, I don't see what other benefit it has apart from that. I really don't.
Do you agree with the idea that Black people in the media represent other Black people? For example, this is a conversation that pops up with Shola, because obviously she's quite a controversial Black activist figure here in Britain. And I've seen some people tweet things like, we need to hold her accountable, basically, and we can't tolerate this kind of stuff because it's a bad look for the Black community. So do you think a Black person in the media represents other Black people?
Well, of course not. Going from the question you asked in a way of, should they be the kind of benchmark or, reference for how other Black people are? Well, of course not. One person shouldn't be the sole representative of a whole entire group that's filled with people of, with different experiences, ideas, outlook, and so on. That's why I don't understand this term, the Black leader. Who appointed you, who voted you, and where was I when that voting was done, kind of thing. So no, they shouldn't. And it's such a dangerous idea, Patience. I think that's one of the biggest hindrance, for a lot of Black individuals, not just entering certain spaces, but also when they are in certain spaces, if we go along with this idea that, because you're Black, you have to represent everyone else that's Black in the whole world at this point, then that creates a certain burden that you don't need to have. The only burden you should have, or responsibility, maybe not burden, is what you need to do in that specific role or place, right? If you're a lawyer, you don't need to now represent all Black people in your nation. You should be focused on how you can be the best you can be in your job. And doesn't mean you don't need to engage in any activism or any sort of reform. If you want to do your thing, but you should be there to do a good job. So when you have that idea of, well, if by me entering this space, I'm not representing my people, then you're not going to enter certain spaces. Does any one white person represent white people, and so on? So I think we need to move away from this idea that someone has to make certain decisions and certain actions, making sure that they put the Black community in mind, or even the Asian community. I've heard, this, Rishi Sunak doesn't represent us. Like, he represents the country. He's there to do a job that will affect the whole country and not just your subgroup.
I agree. I think just because someone looks like you does not mean that they have to represent you. Yeah. And I think the sooner we are able to view people as individuals, because you can't really have it both ways. You can't complain about negative stereotypes and generalizations, yet simultaneously hold this idea that we all have to represent each other, because those two unfortunately go hand in hand. If you're going to say that the certain behaviors of a Black person, good or bad, represent Black people, then the bad ones are also going to represent Black people. If the good ones are going to represent bad people, then the bad ones are going to too. So if you don't like generalizations being made about Black people on the basis of some people that you see in the media or whatever, then you kind of have to abandon this idea that Black people represent other Black people, because you are going to get the good and the bad of that. When they see good representation, they're going to say, this is like the whole Black excellence thing or whatever. I appreciate the concept. I think it's good to celebrate the great things that Black people do, because I think sometimes it's good to kind of see that for the people who are under this belief that they can't accomplish things because of their skin color. Seeing that example can sometimes help to counter that.
I don't mind the concept of Black excellence in the way you've put it, but I think what it does is that it makes achievement, I was going to say Black achievement, which is another issue, this racializing of, these terms sometimes. I think you make it seem like it's abnormal, and it's not. I saw a TikTok or something, and it was of a pilot, a female pilot, a Black female pilot. And oh my goodness, it's like Jesus had come down, oh my gosh, a Black pilot. And it's like, it was so funny seeing people from Kenya and Nigeria and stuff saying, yeah, we exist, we're here, kind of thing. And again, if you want to make it specific to America, which I doubt she's the first Black pilot, but whatever. But there needs to be some specification in some of these things, because Black people are, that's what they say, right? We're capable, we're just as able. And then once you see these a doctor, for goodness sake, it's like so much praise, like it's an abnormality or some kind of exception. And it's like, you're not an exception. It may be there may be disparities, and then we can talk about, why disparities exist, which exists in every single society on earth. And especially given the demographic ratio, there's always going to be disparities. But I just don't think that's a basis to sort of celebrate every normal thing, very normal thing
I mean,
that Black people do.
Yeah, I'm in two minds with it. I don't agree with the idea of calling it Black excellence, and I don't agree with the idea of hyper focusing on the fact that the person is Black and achieving all of these things. Like, I'm opposed to that, but I like I like the idea of kind of showcasing excellence and showcasing successes. Like with the pilot one, I would have no issue, because you see posts like that on social media all the time where someone's just got they've just got their pilot license or whatever, and they're just, and like,
it's amazing,
yeah, or they just bought their first house and they're doing all these things. Like, I think we should definitely have more of that kind of stuff, but I think the focus on it being them being Black is where the problem is, because it kind of, to me, just kind of the reason why I have an issue with it is it kind of highlights the bigotry of low expectations. Like, it's such a shock to you that a Black person did that. Like, it was like, I see Black successful people all the time. I'm not surprised when I see Black successful people. I think it's good to showcase it, because, like I said, if the other narrative that because you're Black you can't do this, you're going to be oppressed, blah 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 blah, if that narrative didn't exist, I would think all of this stuff is completely unnecessary. But because this narrative does exist a lot online, I think there is a benefit to showcasing the success stories and stuff like that, so people who do buy into this stuff have an alternative view, because they can see contradictions to that framework. I just disagree with the idea of highlighting the person's skin color, because it kind of feeds into this idea that Black people usually it kind of feeds into this idea that Black people, it's such a rare thing for them to become successful.
I agree with you. The only thing I actually was thinking, and I actually don't agree, is I don't actually think it presents a different worldview for people who believe in an oppression and victim narrative. Do you know why? Because most of the time, if you actually pay attention to these Black excellence posts, it always 9.9 times out of 10, 9.999 times. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. There's almost yes, it's Black excellence, but it was still achieved because they had to crawl through. And I was reading an interview Idris Elba had, and he was saying the only bit that, we're all fans, we all love a bit of Idris, but the only thing that caught my eye is what he said. I hope my husband's not watching this. Yeah, so he said, yes, I'm successful and all this, and it's good to have more Black people, because we almost have to beat the system, Then that kind of language came back in. I don't know if that's empowering, actually. I think that still somehow either makes them seem like they're special, or it makes it seem like
exceptional cases.
Exactly. And it makes it seem like Black people always have to crawl through this. And I know that narrative is prevalent, but if we are just like any other human being, whether we come from struggle or we don't, if we apply the same formula, of life to reaching success, we will get there eventually. And I'm not saying anything that's so out of this world, because we have hundreds of thousands and thousands and thousands of examples. So I don't actually believe we had the first Black man on the moon. I think I forgot his name, something Glover, and the LA Times did a piece about it, and maybe 3/4 of that piece was spent on slavery and oppression of the past and how we've got here. I don't care about that. I want to know about this man's life. How did he get interested in, in all of this? That's what I care about. So I get that, but I actually think it masks what it really should be,
I think, I agree. I still think there are some people who will still be changed, like, by seeing stuff like that. Because I do know that there are people who are open to different perspectives, whose minds can be changed. So I do think that it can still work for some. I do think it still does work for some people, but I agree with you that those who are really, really loyal to this ideology, it becomes like a religion, to the point where it doesn't matter what evidence is shown to you. Your loyalty to the ideology will cause you to rationalize how those things are just exceptional cases, and your ideology is still true. You know, you just view it as like, oh, you know, well, they're tokens, you know, they're just a token successful Black person, or, well, you know, they're only successful because of this and this and that. Because I think that's just kind of something that human beings do in many cases anyway. You know, like, we don't do this with just race, we do this also with gender. So there are some people who think that men just outperform women all the time just because they're men. And even if you have examples of successful women, again, it will be like, oh, well, they had to work extra hard to get there, and they had to do all this kind of stuff or whatever. And everyone who wants to accomplish something meaningful or successful in their life has to work hard. It's not a sign that you were oppressed that you had to work. Like, it's just,
I don't get it. And you know, it's so funny that some people have that idea, and it's like, just touching on the thing you said about the rationalization. I don't know what I was reading, and they were talking about Melanie Perkins, one of the CEOs of Canva, and they were trying to rationalize how actually her success doesn't negate, you know, the oppression that women kind of face, because I think she came from privilege and all this. And I was reading all that, so I went and looked up, you know, a bit of the story of Melanie Perkins. And apparently she got like 300-400 rejections before she got an investment for Canva. So how is that privilege and hard work? I just don't get how people think sometimes. It's like, well, your hard work was still easier than how my hard work was. It's like, just work the hell hard. Every human goes through rejection, you know, setbacks, delays, you know, demotivation. Every single human being on this planet, it doesn't matter whether you're the poorest or the richest. And, you know, it's just really sad that some people are just so unwilling to just step outside a little bit of their, you know, ideological framework to, you know.
I also think it also depends on scale as well. I think it depends on what you define as success. Because I think if you're defining success as being like a billionaire or something like that, then yeah, of course, there's going to be a lot of your perspective is going to be that you can't accomplish all those things or whatever, because most people won't, and that's just the reality of it. Like, most people, there are certain levels, because when I say regardless of where you're coming from, you can be successful, I don't mean regardless of where you're coming from, you can be a millionaire. Like, that's not how I define success. I define success as improvement. Can you put yourself in a better position than where you started? That's my definition of success. And that's going to look different for different people, because people have different starting points. You know, the starting point that I had is going to be different to someone else's, which is going to be different to someone else's. But can you improve your circumstances and create a better life for yourself than the one you started with? I believe everybody can do that. Do I believe everybody can become a billionaire? No, I don't, actually. But I think that everybody can create a life that makes them feel content and makes them feel fulfilled, and you can better yourself. And I think that, to me, is success. Often when people are rejecting of this idea that you can build yourself up and you can be successful, I think they're rejecting it because they're thinking of the highest possible level of success. But I'm going to move on to my next question. So do you think the Black community is actually a community in the sense that they are united, or do you think it's more of a front, a united front? Do you feel like they have to look as though they're one, but in reality they're actually not? Or do you actually believe that they are a community and united in the traditional sense of how we've typically understood communities?
If it's in the traditional sense of, you know, community being, so there's two ways a group can be a community, whatever. So one's proximity, so, you know, your local community, I suppose, and then one is on shared interests. So if it's on a shared interest, then obviously yes, because their shared interest, on the surface at least, is in terms of what I mentioned before, fighting or being aware of the structural issues in society and stuff. In terms of united front, I would say I don't know, because I don't know who they are trying to present themselves as being united, right? I don't know if it's sort of this internal kind of comfort of I'm part of something, then maybe. But I don't know if I would go so far to say that it's a pretense, at least not consciously or not deliberately. maybe unintentionally, I think yes, because of course they would have different ideas, beliefs, views, even in the ways that they would want to see society, or how to shape society or reshape society and so on. So I think these natural fractions occur in these communities. But yeah, I don't know if I can say that they're trying to pretend or show something that they are not. I don't know.
No, fair enough. What does blackness mean to you? I see this word used a lot, and I don't know what it means. So I'm curious to know if you have any insight onto what blackness means.
So I think it depends who you ask. I think for me, it doesn't mean anything in terms of how I make decisions, or in terms of how I act and stuff. I don't need it to be racialized in any way. But I think to some people, it, especially those born in, countries like the UK and the US, but, let's talk about the UK. Of course, it means something. There's a specific history, right? Being Black British that I or my family and my direct ancestors would never have experienced, right? Coming from Nigeria. So yes, because I have said before, no, blackness doesn't mean anything, and I don't think that's correct. I think it does mean to something to some people. However that identity came about, it now means something, right? And that's why I said in the beginning that yes, there can be benefits to the Black community, and the Black community does exist because the Black identity does exist. What that Black identity actually means, it varies, right? It can be just as basic as your ethnicity, where you come from, where your family background and heritage and so on. Obviously, your skin color, that's a big one. So it can be as sort of basic as that. Or it can be, yes, your ideological framework, how you think politically, how you approach the world, how you approach even white people. That's a big part of what blackness is, whether people want to admit it or not, even within this group. A lot of what blackness is sort of this fight against whiteness, right? It's whiteness, anything considered white, that's why you always have these sort of conflicts of, well, that's a white concept, or that's a white idea, even going as far as the stupid things like punctuality, what the 5 P's, right? Punctuality, presentation, these are white things. So that means blackness can't be a part of that. So yeah, I think that's what definitely actually consciously blackness means to some people. Even if you just read some articles or have some conversations, it is that resistance to whiteness. I think that's what blackness actually means to some people. There is that political edge to it, resistance and all these things, and being aware and being conscious. For some people it's not that. For some people it's resistance in a different way. So it's like, it's that pushback, right? So blackness was created, and it was said to mean a certain thing in terms of dehumanization, being less than human, and being second-class citizens. And so that's what blackness has meant historically. So of course, even though it's not the right way, but people have taken on that sort of identity of blackness, but then to push back against it. And then that's why you have things like Black dignity campaigns or Black pride and things like that and the other. So that's what blackness means to some people as well.
Okay, so I'm going to try and see if I've understood what you're saying, because I'm still a little confused, admittedly. Are you saying that blackness is essentially like an umbrella term to describe things that Black people do or are a part of that are an active political or ideological or whatever rejection of white culture? Would you say that blackness is everything that encompasses everything that's an active resistance to what they deem as being white culture or whiteness? It's like a response to kind of saying, no, we're not going to do. And I guess this will probably be where all the Eurocentric beauty standard stuff comes in and all that kind of stuff. It's like an active rejection of feeling as though they're having these ideas pushed on them from white people? Is that fair to say blackness is basically it's an active resistance against feeling as though you're being pushed into a certain Eurocentric culture? And so blackness is more of like the resistance towards that, and kind of hyper focusing and hyper emphasizing and hyper celebrating things that they would associate more with Black history and Black culture.
Yeah, I mean, not in all ways and not to all people, but there is, you know, it is a part of that, right? Mm-hmm. And like I said, it may not be intentional, it may be unintentional, but there is, when I say unintentional, I mean coming from a place that's understandable, because as I said, there are historical situations where that hasn't happened, in terms of, as you mentioned, beauty, where Black people have not just been told that they weren't, you know, beautiful, whatever, because no one needs to affirm you, but that they weren't human. So that has been there, that exists. So, and that's been seen, or because it's come from sort of the European kind of context, and that's classed as white, then yes, because that's white, then to reclaim your Black identity, which is what Blackness is, then yes, that has to oppose those ideas. And then, yeah, in shorthand, yes, that's opposing whiteness.
So it is reactionary in a sense. So is that what you're saying? Like it's a kind of reactionary. It's like a rejection of the status quo.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So that's why if you're not a person that plays into all that, then that's when you are considered as not either authentic Black, or you're not Black at all, full stop, because you don't have that constant kind of battle against.
So if you don't, so if you're not if you're not actively rejecting what they would describe as white culture or Eurocentric
white ideas,
white ideas. If you're not actively rejecting those things, then you are not considered part of Blackness, because Blackness is in itself reactionary to that stuff. And in order for you to, and I suppose that would make sense as to where all the Oreo accusations and all the you're trying to be white on the inside, all that kind of stuff, because then I suppose if your Blackness then becomes defined by your rejection of whiteness, quote unquote, whatever that means too, if your identity is then defined by your rejection of white things, or things that are considered white or whiteness, then for you to not actively dedicate yourself to rejecting those things would mean that you are taking part in it.
And
therefore you're not taking you're taking part in it, and therefore you're not taking part in Blackness, so therefore you are taking part in whiteness, and so therefore you are a Black person who is acting white or taking part in that kind of white. Is that fair?
I think that's what any reasonable person would see, and especially people who have so-called detached from their Blackness, either, you know, themselves, or if their Black card has been taken away from them, whatever. Especially they would realize that Blackness has always seemed to mean this constant resistance or pushback, or there has to be something that has to be said or pointed out or something. And Shelby Steele speaks a lot about this, and he even mentioned it as some kind of a burden, because it was all antithetical to his actual experiences, not even his beliefs and views, forget that, but even just his actual experiences. And yet he felt he always had to pretend and fit into this bubble of what it meant to be Blackness, and he always had to have this kind of double life, like he would go and live sort of his life, and then he had to go into college and pretend that, you know, he didn't care about merit. He writes this in White Guilt. He didn't care about merit or something like that, and he had to sort of sing along to this kind of tune. So unfortunately, people will say that's not what it means, but when it comes down to it, that's exactly what it means.
Okay, so final question. What would you say to Black people who feel uncomfortable expressing their views or expressing their thoughts because they're worried that they will be ostracized and excluded from the quote unquote Black community?
Speak your views, share your opinion. Like, I'm sorry, it's just, especially if you're one that actually cares about the so-called Black community. A lot of things that hinders, you know, so-called Black progress. I wish we had time to speak about the racialization of these terms, but maybe not today. But yeah, is this conformity mindset. And when you have that, then there's no, because there's a lack of freedom to speak or share ideas, and there's a lack of general group progress, right? We always want to talk about, advancing, Black people and stuff. And yet you can't allow different perspectives within the so-called community. There's different ways to approach life. There's different ways to approach certain issues, to look at certain issues and things like that. And I think, like I said before, if you're only allowed to have one opinion or one version of events in your mind, and then it's not even a community, right? It's a cult, like I said. So why would you care? Unless you want to be part of a cult, then keep your mouth closed, But if you believe in freedom, in individuality, in progress, then you have to allow yourself to be free. Because the Black community, in my opinion anyway, it doesn't have much substance apart from joining people on the basis of something as superficial anyway as skin color, then you really have nothing to lose if you're so-called cast out of, this intangible theoretical concept of the Black community. Why, like I said in the tweet, why sacrifice your own interests, your own genuine beliefs, your principles based on your own experiences to appease people that really, there's nothing that, like you mentioned before, that will ever make them deviate even an inch from what they think. They will always have their own set opinions about what how Black people should be, the right, so-called right opinions to have, especially if you live in liberal societies. I can't say anything if you live in a nation where you probably will be killed for saying what you think, then please don't follow my advice. Don't say what you think. Please. But if you please. But if you live in liberal democracies, whoever you are, because it's not just the Black community that sometimes has their words sort of policed. Especially in the age of identity politics, where ideas are pigeonholed into different groups. Yes, that's the state of things. So whoever you are, say what you think.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. Thank you so much, Ada. You have been fantastic. I really appreciate you giving me your time. Tell us where we can find you if we want to see more.
So all my social media, Ada Akpala, and also at the Equiano Project, where we talk about race, culture, and politics.
Lovely. And I will link all of Ada's links to her socials and everything in my description box. But yeah, thank you so much, Ada. I'll speak to you soon.